All set. Welcome everybody to the showcase event for Alfred Hospital Research Week. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Steve Jane. I'm the Director of Research for Alfred Health and the Dean of the Subfaculty of Translational Medicine Public Health from Monash University. I'd like to firstly acknowledge that we're meeting today on the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nations lands and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the continuing connection between the Kulin Nations and our lands and waterways, and extend respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people who may be with us today. So as I mentioned, it's the seminal event for Research Week, our keynote address, and it's been a tremendous success over many years where we've really delved into many areas of research, and I think this year we are opening the doors to a new frontier as far as what we're engaging with, and that is the role of consumers in research. And I don't think anyone who works in the field would not fail to understand the importance of consumer engagement as we go forward. And we've gone from the point of really being hardly relevant at all, I think when I started research 1,000 years ago, to really now consumers being absolutely embedded and integrated in all of our work from its inception through development, conceptualization and delivery, and now even assessment, where we're going to have formal consumer panels involved in assessment of our work. So I think we must embrace this, and I think many of us who have realised there's enormous enrichment to our research from engaging with consumers. And actually, Jason Ong spoke yesterday from Melbourne Sexual Health Clinic, where they had a range of new research projects which actually had been conceptualised not by the researchers at all, but by the consumers who they engage with in the sexual health sphere. So a whole new world, I think, of how we think about research engagement with consumers. I think we are, change page. We are very blessed to have our keynote speaker today, who is Ainslie Cahill, AM, and I welcome her down from Sydney as our keynote speaker. Probably not too many people more qualified, I think, in the Australian sphere for being able to talk on the importance of consumers, and I think probably the most telling component of that would be Ainslie's role as the chair of the NHMRC MRFF Consumer Advisory Group, which is about the pinnacle of consumer advice in this country. So she's also the consumer lead for Monash Partners Academic Health Science Centre. She's been a health consumer advocate for 22 years and has held consumer positions with the University of New South Wales, the Cancer Council of New South Wales, Australian Research Centre for Cancer Survivorship, and she's the previous Chief Executive Officer of Arthritis Australia. Ainslie, for all of this seminal work, was appointed as a member of the Order of Australia for service to people with arthritis and community health groups in 2020. And we are very privileged and lucky to be able to welcome Ainslie as our keynote speaker today. And she will speak on the changing face of research through consumer involvement. Personally, Ainslie, thank you so much for coming. We're very grateful and look forward to hearing your address.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that warm welcome, Steve. I don't classify myself as an expert, but today, this morning, I'll be drawing on my experiences and observations about consumer and community involvement in research. I'll also be providing some tips about useful resources which you may find of benefit, and also your some tips about your approach to grants applications. I see that there is a lot of work required in this particular area. So please note, I do not have a magic bullet or wand for getting grant applications across the line. So if you're here for that today, feel free to leave now. Before proceeding, in the interests of brevity, I do find that in this industry in which we work, there's a lot of words. It's verbose. And so instead of saying all the time consumer and community involvement, I will say CCI. I may not say the National Health and Medical Research Council in full, I'll say NHMRC, and I won't be saying Medical Research Future Fund in full, MRFF. So as Steve said in his introduction, I have been a health consumer advocate for 22 years, both professionally and voluntarily, and it's been and still is a great pleasure and privilege. And for those 20 years, for 20 of those years, I've had direct involvement in health and medical research. I've seen an awful lot of change. I think it's fantastic. And I can see that there will be more change, and that will be fantastic. My entree into the unknown world was when I joined Arthritis Australia. I became their national marketing and business manager and later was promoted to chief executive officer. And I held that role for 12 and a half years. I absolutely loved working at Arthritis Australia, but unlike Joe Biden, I knew when to let go and pass the baton. At the time of joining Arthritis Australia, I had two close friends living with rheumatoid arthritis, and I saw firsthand what a tough life that can be. Before meeting my friends, I had naively thought that arthritis was just a natural part of aging. You got sore knees, sore hips, and a sore back. I did not know that arthritis was an umbrella term covering 100 conditions. And when I joined, I later learned, much to my interest, in fact, that two chronic conditions my sister had lived with for more than 26 years come under the umbrella term. So my two friends and my sister gave me more impetus to be there fighting, advocating, representing, and ensuring the voice of arthritis was heard. Previously, my career had included administrative and leadership roles in media, magazine and newspaper publishing, in marketing and communications, in film, television and theatre. But it's fair to say that those experiences equipped me well for doing the work that I have been doing since, and also in grappling with the world of health and health consumer representation and medical research. I had a lot to learn. I did my homework and identified two well-respected, highly experienced CEOs of health consumer organisations, didn't know them, contacted them and asked if they would meet me. They happily did so, and I was able to pick their brains. And they were instrumental in building my knowledge and understanding of the real world of health consumer representation and advocacy. And I kept in touch with them. Interestingly, both told me that it takes 12 to 15 years to get your point across in Canberra and to influence policy change. And guess what? They were right. I also had the benefit of rheumatologists on our board and our scientific advisory committee on hand to give me an understanding of the intricacies of the many forms of arthritis, plus research, how it worked. And this is my first piece of advice to all of you, whether you're a researcher, a health consumer, or anything else for that matter. The best thing you can do for yourself is seek out people with experience and pick their brains. I don't know anyone who is not prepared to share their knowledge. So please think of that if you're feeling uncertain about consumer and community involvement. I believe there are 5 key ingredients for consumer and community involvement. I call them the 5 C's: consumers, community, collaboration, communication, and consideration. And I'll elaborate before long. Now, these days, as Steve mentioned, there's a widely held view that consumer and community involvement does add to the research, to the impact, and it's an integral part of health and medical research. The NHMRC Community Qualitative Research Report 2024, see what I mean about verbosity, found that many Australians believe that the general public should have a say in research priority areas. And the Monash Partners-led Consumer and Community Involvement Study, for which I was one of the chief investigators, found from surveys and interviews an increased recognition of CCI for both the value it brings plus the ability to attract grant funding. But in all instances, the overriding view is that people with a lived experience of the condition, the disease, the health service, helping to set priorities and framing the questions to be investigated, and all the other elements throughout the life cycle of the study, including evaluation, including translation, including advocacy, is essential. And the list goes on for how collaboration between researchers and health consumers can benefit all concerned. We shouldn't forget the importance of involving consumers and community members from diverse backgrounds, communities, ages, interests, perspectives. We're not all the same, and it's important to hear the viewpoints. Whatever method is adopted, it's critical to understand, for researchers to understand, what they want out of the collaboration, what they want from the relationship, and what sort of people or persons they enlist. Many times I have seen a consumer advisory group fail because the researchers had either recruited too quickly or hadn't necessarily thought what they wanted from the collaboration. And there was one case where one advisory group disbanded before it contributed to anything. It made me ask the question, were they simply ticking a box? There are other instances where grant applications, I assess, say they have a health consumer investigator, a person who is an academic as well as having a lived experience. While there isn't anything wrong with that, I believe it lacks punch if that is the only person providing consumer and community involvement to that study. An academic or a health professional does bring a bias to a study, and non-academic consumers, patients or carers, can redress the balance, get it right from the outset, get a balance, get a variety of views. Everyone's got something to offer. And consumers need to carefully consider why and how they want to contribute. It's not simply about sharing your story or perhaps repeatedly telling us your tale of woe. It's about thinking beyond yourself and what the proposed research means for many Australians who stand to benefit from the study. When I joined Arthritis Australia, I was surprised how little collaboration there was and how little people living with arthritis and their carers were contributing to the organisation's purpose and strategic direction. I set about to change that, and over time, my small team and I developed a wide network of stakeholders and supporters, all bringing their unique experience and expertise together. Also, When I entered this arena, and I use this word deliberately, I was surprised by the competitive nature of my colleagues. Of course, the industries in which I had previously worked were highly competitive, but much of the success of developing good magazines, TV programs, films, and plays relies heavily on teamwork and collaboration, not working in isolation. And that's what I experienced when I first came. And I set about in my little world of arthritis to change that. Later, I joined the board of Consumers Health Forum, and that was excellent for me to be able to learn more about health systems, for policy, and again to build a wider network and encourage collaboration, because health consumer organisations in those days were very competitive. I was CEO of an affiliated organisation. Think the federal government working with the state governments. My God, this can be a challenge. And I did notice there were some very nasty people. But as I've always said, if you grow up in Australia with red hair and freckles, you have broad shoulders and you are not going to give up. At Arthritis Australia, I was responsible for not only overseeing our grants program, but also associated fundraising. Not a lot of people really knew about arthritis. Like me, they had perceptions which were incorrect. So using my marketing, communication and media experience, I developed a range of fundraising strategies, and we did very well. I also changed the way we worked with the pharmaceutical industry. This was supported by my board, and at the time we knew that this organisation, it was a new board, fairly new board, a new CEO. We knew that we would, as a result of changing the way we worked with pharma, we would lose a considerable amount of revenue. At the time we made the change, 60% of the revenue of Arthritis Australia came from the pharmaceutical industry, mainly two companies. Unhealthy way to operate. Yes, our revenue fell, but it was up to me to establish, think of unique ways of increasing and changing our revenue base. And we went from strength to strength. So nothing is impossible. You just need to be creative. You know, it's the old creative accounting as well. Uh, honest accounting, but creative. So in about 2010, I managed to convince the board and the medical director without any opposition that we would appoint two consumers to our grants assessment panel. Two, because often one consumer is very isolated. And it turned out to be beneficial for all concerned, because after some close evaluation over a few years, we realised that the opinions and independent scorings of the health consumers and peer reviewers were mostly compatible. It also showed that during face-to-face grant meetings, the respect between all members was very healthy. Often consumers would give their views, which the peer reviewers would change their mind about the quality of the research, and vice versa. And I now experience this when contributing to panels in HMRC, MRFF and other independent funders. But that wasn't always the case. And on some advisory committees stacked with professors and researchers, I've been treated differently. One person, peering down his nose, asked pejoratively, "And what's your lived experience?" When I rattled off my personal health list, his eyes widened like saucers. And you see, I have always preferred to be a consumer representative rather than talk about me all the time, believe it or not. Of course, I draw on my personal experiences, but I often feel it's unnecessary for me to always convey my story. I do when I think it's relevant. Otherwise, I think about the wider people that we're trying to help. And I also must say, I've never been intimidated by disregard. I've continued to be myself and chipped away at breaking down the barriers, sometimes water dripping on stone. I'm often asked how to get started with CCI by both health consumers and researchers. There is no one size fits all. It depends on your location, the policy and practices of universities, research institutions, if they exist. It's important to get an understanding of what consumer and community involvement means. Many a time when I look at grant applications, they talk about consumer engagement. And with the NHMRC Consumers Health Forum joint statement classifies consumer engagement as when information and knowledge about research is shared with consumers and community to better inform them on why, how, and where, and by whom research is conducted. That's not consumer involvement. When assessing grant applications, we're looking for involvement from pre-study to completion, and as I mentioned earlier, evaluation and translation early, not later. I also see grant applications which I refer to as the gunner application. And by that, it's I'm going to, we're going to, not good enough. You should have done much of this already. And the other one I love, which I had a couple of months ago, and I've seen it before, it's what I call the dissertation. A grant application which tells me what consumer involvement is, but it doesn't tell me what they've done or what they're doing. So there's some tips about grant writing. Also, one of the resources that I think might be of help for those of you who are not quite sure is to refer to the Medical Research Future Fund principles for consumer and community involvement. It's a really good resource, and I think you would find it useful as a checklist before you get started, and then when you're preparing, and then to go back and say, am I doing this? Am I doing this? We also, in the process, NHMRC and CHF, we're updating a statement on consumer and community involvement. It was first written in 2016 with consultation across Australia, but it's outdated. It's outdated because what is happening now and the advancements that we've made. The national consultation for the statement has received some very enthusiastic and strong views from Australia. I've attended a couple of workshops and including a couple where I was scribe. Very interesting hearing people's comments. But one of the things that a lot of people are saying, we need to make consumer and community involvement mandatory. Well, already the NHMRC, MRFF, independent funders have strengthened their CCI expectations, including that they are scored by assessors, including consumers, who form part of the assessment panel. There'll be more to come, but in many ways, that in itself says to me that it's mandatory. So if you want to get funding, follow what the criteria is and make sure that you're adopting it. We are now in HMSC are about to introduce with the clinical trials grant opportunity, scoring and members on the panel, and that I think begins next month. So when it comes to CCI, leadership, absolutely. The NHMRC is in the process of revising its research strategy and will set a new tone for consumers and community. There will be a greater emphasis on embedding research processes that are modern, efficient and consumer-centred, and how this will be achieved will form part of the action plan to be developed following the strategy's ratification. Already, there are a number of universities, research institutions, LHDs, hospitals, who have CCI policies and consumer and community advisor groups. And the Alfred Alliance partners have their own policies and systems. And I heard from Steve this morning that only last week, Alfred received the gold star for CCI. So you've got plenty of people around you, plus dedicated CCI team members who can help you as you go along the way. I think the benefits of CCI are becoming self-evident and already are considered standard practice. We need organisations to support researchers with funding for training and for mentoring. In Western Australia and Queensland, they already have schemes, competitive grant schemes, for sums up to $25,000 to help researchers start CCI. And I would love to see that throughout Australia in every state and territory. Another resource to help you is the CCI handbook, which was developed under leadership of West Australian Health Translation Network, WATN, with the support of ARA, which is the Australian Health Research Alliance, and their consumer advisory group, of which I'm a member. This is a fantastic handbook. I've used it so many times to share with my colleagues, and they love it. It's colour-coded and divided into information specifically for organisations, researchers, consumers and funders. It's designed so all stakeholders have a clear understanding of each other's roles and mutual obligations. This is the key, from planning to completion to evaluation. The handbook also includes a raft of resources to support the process, and I strongly recommend it to you. Of course, the questions I'm most asked: how do I do it? Where do I start? How do I find the right consumers? Well, it's important to understand, as I said earlier, this is not a one-size-fits-all and doesn't have to be a major production, large scale. Start small. Even if you start small, it will give you ideas for how you can build on that. There are many ways or methods that I've adopted over the years: matching researchers with an individual consumer who has relevance to the researcher's interest. Only a few years ago, I introduced a fairly senior researcher who worked in ovarian cancer with a woman who had been affected by cancer. Later, the researcher told me this was a life-changing experience for her. She'd never met a woman who had been affected by ovarian cancer. She felt this had a huge impact on the sort of work that she was doing, and just as good, she had a huge job satisfaction. So there are other benefits that we don't realise. And while we're talking about basic scientists, last year I was taken for a lab tour at Lowy Institute at the University of New South Wales. I was so impressed by my guide and the way he was able to convey all aspects in plain language. At the end of the tour, I complimented him on this skill, to which he replied it came from many hours of practice, mostly at the pub with his mates, drawing diagrams and words on coasters to help them understand his work. I thought that was brilliant. I've guided researchers to source consumer and community support through their local clinicians, local health districts, or community faith centres. ABC Regional Radio has been incredibly valuable for larger projects, introductions to health consumer organisations, or creating a consumer advisory group, encouraging researchers to keep up to date with state and federal government and national health consumer organisations' strategic priorities for research. See if there's a fit. Don't invent the wheel, and see what opportunities is for you to assist with those priorities and hopefully get some funding. Social media, I have had some success with that. I do find, and support groups, very successful, but I have found the very nature of social media is that it's a quick grab for people. So they might say that they're interested in being involved, whether it's involved, giving some advice, but their interest fades. So I tend to shy away from that and leave it to others who really do have the experience with social media. I'm not a fan. showing my age. Another resource, how am I going for time here? Yeah. Another resource which I'm sure be interested in is the Health Research Hub. It's a new evidence-based digital platform to guide consumer and community involvement in health research. It's free, it's open access, high quality, co-designed resources and tools for all key stakeholders. It was developed by Monash Partners with the support of Wotton and supported by MRFF funding. And I was one of the chief investigators on that. And I'd like to acknowledge Carol Hodgson, he's here, the CEO of Monash Partners. So there are so many different and effective methods to undertake consumer and community involvement. Too many to mention. I've just seen some fantastic achievements over time and collaborations, and I think we're going to be learning about some of those during the awards presentations. Again, start small. Buddy systems. If you're in a lab environment, open days can be very helpful. And it's amazing where that can lead if you continue the relationship, and it can even help with fundraising. I've seen that happen on a number of occasions. So another message I think is we can't always agree, but what we can do when we're trying to shape research, doesn't matter what your role is, it's about mutual respect and consideration. Everyone's got different views, that's life, and it's just about how you work your way through that and come to consensus. I've found that to be very rewarding when we've got everyone in the same room, including policymakers, including government officials, all the clinicians, allied health, researchers. It's been very positive. And from that, we were able to develop our national strategy for arthritis, which was ratified by the government and is currently being implemented. It's the only way to go. I've spoke about terminology, and this is critical. You speak and write using plain language. It is a skill, and I believe these forms of communication should be embedded in specific university degrees and training. I once spoke to a researcher about her layperson summary because it was as clear as mud, and I needed to publish it in the annual report. I rang her and I asked her to pretend that I was her neighbour and she was chatting to me over the back fence. She thought about it, she said some things, and then she said, look, I'm finding it very difficult to do this. She said, I don't know how. So, as you can imagine, the job of translating the summary I gave to our medical director. I also work with EMCRs about elevator pitches. Tell me your story. It's a one-to-one. What is your study? I type it verbatim. I go away using track changes option. I edit, and then I make comments about why I have made the changes. It's been incredibly successful and very satisfying. So this is something that you might consider. Just finding someone to read, talk to you at first, and see if they can understand what you're trying to do and trying to say. So I have seen, and in a small way, contributed to the changing face of health and medical research. I'm encouraged by the next generation of researchers. They're inquiring minds, they want to learn, they want to do CCI, and I'm also encouraged by the young and upcoming consumer and community representatives. Yes, there's still a way to go, but there have been many inroads I've seen in my 22 years. We should also be mindful of trust. Trust in institutions, including science, is more fragile than ever before. We've got a lot of resistance, climate change science, vaccines, the diatribe coming from the US. So this is why ongoing consumer and community involvement will ensure research that's relevant, powerful, translated, and respected. there are so many potential outcomes from well-considered health and medical research. And put simply, it's not rocket science. It's about relationship building, talking to people. Start. You shouldn't be afraid of it. Consumers don't bite, and it can be a very worthwhile and satisfactory experience. So familiarise yourself with these resources. Thank you for all the brilliant work you do, whether as a researcher or as a health consumer. And thank you again for inviting me today.
Thanks so much, Ainslie. We're going to have some time for questions. I'll just make a couple of reflections. I think one of the great components of Ainslie Talk was actually providing resources for us. Many of us are not sure where to go, how to begin, but there's a number of slides there that has given us direction, and I would recommend those publications to you as a really good entree into how you might structure your work going forward. I would also say, as a largely former redhead, that I understand that growing up in Australia as a bluey was challenging indeed. So yeah, I get it. I'll take some questions from the floor.
I work for the Alfred at Headspace in Bentley in the early psychosis program. And I'm one of those unicorns that you referred to earlier, a little bit ambivalently, I thought, the researcher who's also a consumer. But of course, my research is not in the field that I work in, but I've taken an interest in where research and the consumer meet, and I've found that there's some resistance to the consumer, at least in my early attempts to forge relationships with researchers in mental health, and I don't know if this also applies, let's say, in the physical sciences. There's a fair bit of gatekeeping that goes on, and in wanting to be involved in research, it feels like one has to go through quite a few hoops to make those relationships function. I wonder if you've got any tips for the consumer who wants to get involved, who might actually happen to work on the inside rather than from the outside.
Sure. Resistance from whom?
Well, it relates a little bit to the concept of co-design, where co-design I've noticed is very fashionable and very popular in my sphere, but that it can tend to be a sort of code for co-opting the consumer without necessarily paying, shall we say, due respect to the consumer's role in the research that happens. So that, for example, I would hope to see a consumer be offered co-authorship on a paper that results from such research. And I've seen that happen, but I've also seen it, shall we say, being kind of not considered or...
Yes, okay, get you. I think that the new statement will be addressing some of those issues. I have certainly myself been co-author, and it a long time ago. So there is change, but it gets back to what I had said earlier about sometimes people seem to like to work in isolation. So we do have that a long way to go. We still have, and I receive research ideas from investigators. What do you think of this? My question is, well, who's been involved in the prioritisation? Oh, the researchers. I say, sorry, I can't help you. So you have to toughen up, number one, but number two, you've got to build your relationships. So the sort of people you want to work with, I would just keep in touch with them. Water dripping on stone, frustrating as it is, but it's building relationships.
One of the most challenging areas, I think, are people who work in truly fundamental science, basic science, where it's very unclear, I suppose, as to what the role of the consumer is in the genesis of a project they can have no conceptualization of. So I'd just be interested in your thoughts, advice in that context, because, you know, the people that be are asking all of us to be involved with consumer engagement, irrespective of where we work along the continuum of research.
I think this is a big issue, and I think that to an extent, many of us accept the difficulty and aren't rigid in that thinking. I also know that the Health Research Hub, which I mentioned, Monash Partners led, does address fundamental, basic and discovery research. You might like to have a look at that. And it does indicate that it doesn't have to be big. I think, though, with fundamental research, it's very good for researchers to get an understanding of the environment in which they're working and they're trying to service. What does this mean to the person or people who will benefit, and how can I get... That's where those buddy systems work very well. Very informal, a chat, and they've been incredibly successful. And also for health consumers, buddy systems, people who've just come into this and really aren't sure what they're meant to be doing. So I feel Health Research Hub, take a look at that. And I don't think people are going to be as tough as they used to be with that regard.
Thanks for your talk, Ainslie. I'm Katrina Lewis. I'm the Director of Patient Experience Consumer Engagement at Alfred Health. It's lovely to see this up there, and as someone who was heavily involved, along with one of our consumers who's sitting behind me, Andrea, it's great to see that. And I think what I wanted to make a comment on and then ask a question about was really about us working in silos, and that consumers are a finite resource. And I think that these sorts of things are wonderful opportunities, like the Alfred Research Alliance, like Monash Partners, those sorts of things, about us all working together. And what are we doing in mainstream public hospitals, and how can we share resources? And I've certainly found that really helpful. Being part of a research alliance and being part of Monash Partners has afforded us that opportunity. I was interested in your comments early on, and Ainslie, I really wanted to think about, we talk about consumers being involved right at the start of, grant writing research, but even before that, I'm interested in how do you think we've evolved around actually consumers setting the research agenda? So around conditions and things that they lived in, and how do we go around researching things that consumers living with conditions, a good example might be MS, where we know what consumers might want to research might be very different from what clinicians want to research. And do you have any views around that, or have you seen that changing over time?
I have seen it change over time, and I do have some views on that. It's about getting people together at an early stage. It's about the willingness of researchers to do that. But years ago, there was a global planning meeting for inflammatory research, and the clinicians wanted a priority, or the main priority, to be looking at markers to help establish the level of the disease. The consumers said, no, we're not interested in that. We are interested in fatigue. We are so tired. We want a quality of life. We want to be with our families. We want to work. And the researchers listened. So it is about communication and talking and presenting your case. But I do again think with time there will be more and more researchers who will understand. And that's why I also mentioned one of the tips was to look at what relevant health consumer organisations have already prioritised. That's a very good first step. And if you're a consumer, I mean, the consumers have been involved in that. That's it. Thank you.
Great pleasure introducing Professor Sophia Zoudis, who's the head of the School of Public Health and Translational Medicine, one of Australia's foremost diabetologists and clinical trialists, and has enormous consumer engagement in her own research programs. And I can think of no one more fitting to chair this panel and introduce our panelists. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'm going to take the prerogative of not standing at the podium and sitting down to introduce our panel. Thank you for that kind introduction, Stephen. It's a great pleasure to be here. And this is really going to be a conversation, we hope. And we hope this will allow us to explore some of the complexities of consumer community involvement. So without further ado, I'm going to, and thank you to Ainslie for her incredible lecture. Lots of tips there and lots of thinking for us to do around how we move forward with this involvement. It was great and inspiring lecture. So without further ado, I want to introduce our other panel members. Daniel Olasoji. Daniel takes his seat. He leads the community engagement at the Baker Heart and Diabetes Institute and is really involved in connecting people's lived experience with world-class research. He works closely with patients, donors and communities to highlight the human impact of heart and diabetes research. Welcome, Daniel. Our next panel member is Melissa Lurie. Melissa, please come and take your seat. Melissa's a double lung transplant recipient at the Alfred, and she's participated in 4 research projects and clinical trials, and since 2023 has been an Alfred Health consumer and is currently a member of the Digital Health Reference Group, Clinical Trials Research Support Advisory Group, Alfred Health Emergency Quality and Risk Committee. So very busy lady. Thank you for being here, Melissa. And finally, and no less important in the panel, so I've got to move to the right page, is Justine Phillips. And Justine is a survivor of out-of-hospital cardiac arrest in 2020. Justine shares her miraculous story of survival to help raise awareness on sudden cardiac arrest and arm individuals with the knowledge on what they can do to help save lives. She's the founder of Heart Matters Australia and aims to take automated external defibrillators more accessible, increase CPR participation and education, stress awareness, and more importantly, an increase in survival rate of sudden cardiac arrest. So I think you'd all join me in welcoming this panel. Thank you for being here. So as I said, this is really a conversation, and I like to think of myself as the young event and really bringing out your experiences. And what we're going to start with is, I might start with you, Justine, in giving us a reflection of what impact you think consumer involvement can have on future health research. And I'm going to ask all of you, and Ainslie's had a little say. Yes? Is my microphone working? Oh, you want me to explain? All right, well, thank you. Okay, can you hear me now? Sorry. All right, please, Justin.
Okay, so I suppose my involvement since my cardiac arrest has been with the Baker Institute, and it's actually been really good to get involved in some of their programs and their research so that I can pass on some of the experiences that I've had and that could be a priority with future research or even learnings within the heart health industry. You know, and for one example, and I assume I can talk about the app, was, you know, one of the little workshops that I attended was for an app which was to help with patients who had suffered heart failure, and it was about connecting the patient to the clinician so that they could oversee, and instead of that patient having to be, you know, regularly going in to see the clinician, they would upload all their information such as their daily intake, it could be on water, their food intake, their medications, blood pressure, and it was a way of monitoring that patient. So I found that really interesting, and for someone who, you know, is required to go have their regular checkup with a cardiologist, to have some input into what changes could be made with that app to help improve it, or, you know, just to hear other people's opinions as well, I found really engaging. And I know now that it has been taken to that next step, which Daniel knows more about that than me, but it's great to be able to see, you know, programs like that actually being implemented and you being able to have an impact so that that helps someone else further down the track.
So Justine, that was really about having that direct involvement from
Absolutely.
the get-go in the development of a
Absolutely.
new technology and its introduction. Thank you for that. We're going to move to Melissa and she's going to give us her thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's about having the different perspective of the consumer. They can see the gaps and the bias in the health system, what's missing, their points of view, and systems can be it could be written it's meant to be this way, but in reality, not necessarily the way that it works. And when a consumer is living it, you know, from day to day, they can see that and can tell, can share that experience of how it works.
Can I draw you out? Can you share with us what one of those biases could be? Because, you know, we're all lots of health professionals in this audience, only if you're comfortable doing so, because we've got blind spots, right?
Yeah, so that's, I can't think of one that I'd right now, but I was having really early on as a consumer, it was just a one-off meeting about wording in the strategic plan, and we was just sort of ended up being a conversation, and I just threw out something, and whoever I was talking to just went, I've never thought about it that way. And it's just something that I've always think about, and it's just, you know, that's my life, it's what I think about, and that was sort of my it for me. This is why I'm doing this. This is why I'm in part of this role, of just the different perspective of, oh, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
And the opening that conversation.
Right. So, yeah, thinking differently, and the language that we use is really
Yeah.
important. Thank you for that. Daniel, any reflections from you?
Sure. I want to say thank you, first of all, for everyone attending and having me be a part of this. I had to travel all the way from next door, so good to be here. In terms of, I guess, why it's important to have CCI in our research is, I think mainly for me, realizing that it should be a shift in our perspective from it just being a ticker box or a requirement, but now this is actually an improvement in terms of quality of the research as well now. Like, this is really an elevation in the quality of the type of work that is being put out from clinicians, from researchers of all different kinds of fields. And I think that's why it's really important now, because it's actually elevating what we've already been doing traditionally, and shifting away from this silo mentality like we've spoken about already. But it now being, this is what research needs to look like in this in this age, in this generation, in this society that we have now. It actually is a level up from what we've been doing. Yeah.
Thank you. And you've mentioned something that's one of my questions that was the
Apologies.
first to go to. And maybe I'll bring Ainslie back into this, because we've talked about consumer engagement and involvement being different, but also embedding it in our work. How do we make it business as usual, grassroots, not just a tick box? And anyone can comment if they feel.
I think because people will see the benefits. And I also think business as usual, it has to be resourced. So universities and organisations, it's very easy to pass the buck, no pun intended, to say, well, how do we afford it? Well, if you want to survive and be a quality research institution, then you need to put your money where that will help you. I did say earlier, there is creative accounting. I used to do it all the time at Arthritis Australia. It was very legal and legitimate, but I would have to swap things over and we survived and we strengthened. So take risks, believe in it, and you will benefit from it.
Yeah, I think to add to that, is maybe jumping on that, the funding aspect of things is maybe that demystifying that concept of how much does this cost, or it being a very costly exercise to do when it comes to engagement. And I think it costs more, or the bigger cost is not doing it, first of all, but it also costs more the later down the line you're probably trying to implement these things. If it's from the very beginning, if you're implementing some of these engagements or involvement strategies, you're able to plan a lot further and maybe get a little bit more creative with accounting, as mentioned. I think, having that at the beginning is a more beneficial way to go about it, and that helps out when it comes to different types of activities that you might have. Yeah.
Yeah. So cost is not a barrier. It's a concept of a barrier, but it's not truly a barrier. And that was what in our pre-brief meeting, we talked about, not making those excuses and starting from the very beginning. Any thoughts on, and it is another question here, how we change that next generation? So we talked about it being grassroots, but how do we change the next generation of researchers so that it's a given? What would you say to it? We've got young emerging and researchers coming into the field. What would you say to them about how to consider your perspective?
I think to exposure to the consumers early on, and so then it becomes second nature. Being connecting with consumers early on, that's just part of what they do. It's part of the role moving forward.
Yeah, Justine.
Yeah, I agree with that. Definitely connecting with consumers earlier on. And I think also, as Ainslie mentioned earlier, support groups. There's a lot of support groups for lots of different, diseases and issues out there that people are in. And, having access to those support groups is one way of being able to get into, target your next group. And yes, it may be an older generation. And I know and I had a conversation earlier with Daniel and Melissa, my daughter's, you've got to get on TikTok, Mum, to get to that next generation. And for me, I'm like, oh, settle down. So, but yeah, and that younger generation, they are digitally driven. It's having ways to get into those groups that are also on, that I suppose they share their diseases and stuff and their trials and tribulations they're going through on social media. So it's knowing how to access those people on social media as well, who have big followings and stuff.
Yeah, well, that was where we're going to segue to social media. And Daniel's chomping at the bit. Please.
I was going to say one more thing that could be added to that is maybe championing when it's done well within institutes. I think that seeing that from highlighted at a very high level in different research institutes or universities or within the hospital is important, because then it shows and sets the standard and the tone for what that should be within the organization. And I think if we're talking about the next generation of researchers as well, any type of programs that are being developed for the leadership development for researchers or moving them into, being lab heads or whatnot in the future, CCR should be part of that as well. I think it's cool and well enough to allow them to be great public speakers or know how to, write an abstract or really good methodology. But if they're not also having training in the CCR aspect of things, then you're shooting yourself in the foot as an institute, I'd say.
Yeah, it's a good point you make, because recently every grant that comes across my desk from my students, the first thing I say, where's the consumer and community involvement? And they say, oh, we're planning to do that. And I say, no, we're going to start doing it from the very beginning, from the concept. So we make it as part of, the requirement and their training. It's a really good point, particularly as PhD and other research students who are just coming into the sector early days. There's two things I want to get to. One of them's the social media and the other is diversity in consumer involvement. And I wondered who wanted to take we've started on social media. We wanted to talk a little bit more about, Ainslie, you made the point that, it's not your thing, the younger crowd, but how do we do it effectively? You've had an experience, Justine. Any of the other panel members, any thoughts on, what it can bring to, research?
Social media. Social media is a tough one because it's so quick. It's quick and then it's gone. And it's just really TikTok now. The Facebook's sort of old. No one's really using it anymore. It's really the quick. So it may be a great tool for advertising, but beyond that, I'm not so sure how. It's a tough one. Social media and getting on it and getting that attention and keeping the attention
Yeah, so it's time consuming, right?
and
'Cause-
time consuming.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess, for me, I can look at it from my perspective and I'm just informing and educating about what I've been through. But, when you're a researcher who's trying to, push, their upcoming research and looking for participants and stuff, it is a hard one, and it is that quick fix sort of, that quick, you have a look and then tomorrow there's a new trend that's happening. So it's always changing and evolving. So yeah, that's a tough one I can say from a consumer, like I can get on and I can have a quick look and jump off. But yeah, definitely, as Melissa said, TikTok's, that seems to be all the rage with the, when you talk about younger generation and so forth, which that's, I'm not into that. But
and we're really scared because they're getting all their medical information from TikTok.
yeah, they
as
are,
well.
and it's
So-
interesting you say that, because I look at it and I look at CPR. I'm just quickly going off topic here. Look at how some CPR information is portrayed, and I sit there and cringe, because it's like, people actually walk away thinking, oh, and it's like, I know it's a bit of a joke, but there are people out there that, they take things literally once they see them. So, yeah.
Daniel, want to say anything?
I guess even on that, because there are so many dangers with social media, it's probably a little bit more of a responsibility then for researchers to be there as well, to be thought leaders in that space too. So I think we shouldn't shy away from that. I think the benefit when it comes to CCI, with social media, is more so around going where people already are. I think that might be the main benefit when it comes to, maybe the conversation around trying to find, where could you go, where could you connect with a researcher? If we have a lot more researchers maybe tapping into some of these groups that exist already on your Facebooks, I think that's probably the only channel that really allows you to have a group. But other platforms that might exist like that, if we have more researchers going there, it becomes easier for people who want to share their experience. I think, as your question was before, it becomes easier for people to be able to know, how can I connect with someone? So I think we need to go where people already exist, and that's probably one of the main benefits when it comes to social media then.
Okay, so let's move to diversity. And Ainslie, you made a point that we should have more diverse consumer involvement, takes different forms. Can you extend your thoughts on that for the audience?
Well, I think the most important thing is not to make that decision yourself, but to ask the people you're trying to involve. So I am of a certain type, white Anglo-Saxon baby boomer. Why am I going to make decisions about what I think Aboriginal communities or culturally diverse? And so I've always it's sort of my marketing background. It's you go out to the people and talk to them. What do they want? What are they interested in? And during at the commencement of COVID, I was doing a lot of work in southwestern Sydney, which is culturally diverse, big Aboriginal community as well. And it was picked on by the federal government. This is an area where there were helicopters and army and people had to stay at home. And so I was asked to prepare some resources for those communities about COVID attached to particular health conditions. So in order to do that, and we're in lockdown, I just sourced community workers, faith groups. I'd never met them before, a lot of them, and just explained what I was doing. We got fantastic support, and we were able to develop in language resources that we could disseminate through appropriate channels. So you ask the people, don't make the decision.
Any other thoughts? Maybe I'll ask Melissa, because how did you get involved in consumer work? Because part of it is also thinking about how people come into the sector. And Ainslie, you shared your story. Could you reflect on, what motivated you to, sign up and do all the extraordinary work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I was part of a support group for it wasn't lung transplant, just transplant. So Together in Transplant. Yeah, it was a support group, and a person from that who's a consumer at a Sydney hospital said, "Hey, you should get involved in this. I think it would be really good at your hospital." So then I had to search it on the Alfred website to actually find it and look for it. So it was, yeah, it didn't come from anywhere here. I had to look for it after someone from Sydney said, "Hey, get involved."
Yeah.
So yeah, it was really looking for it after I was encouraged to do so. And a few times I was like, no, I'm not sure about this. And at the time too, I wasn't really healthy enough to be doing that. So it took some time to get here.
Thanks for sharing that.
I'd say for research and the diversity aspect of things, maybe just also being quite realistic for the particular project or question that's being looked into or researched. If it is for a very specific, minute population, it's tokenistic if you now try to answer those. If you now try to answer those diversity aspect of things, because yeah, if your research really is for this specific angle and this particular population group, then I think definitely get those voices in. But when it comes to now a lot of broader questions that we have and a lot of broader conditions that affect a wide range of different people, it's very important to now get that diverse voice in. I think maybe looking at what is the impact and who is impacted by the end of my research, and then seeing what type of people are represented in that. Those are the same people that should be brought to the beginning of that involvement as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. I've had an opportunity to ask lots of questions. I'm going to open it to the audience and then online, because I know we've got people online. Do we have any questions online first? No. Okay. Anyone from the audience? Steve.
So I'd be interested, thanks all, some great insights. I'd be interested in all of your perspectives as to what we do about consumer fatigue, where we've got a huge number of researchers all demanding consumer involvement with really, to this point, a finite number of consumers. How do we either expand our consumer pool? Do we ask you to advocate for us? Or what do we do to try and avoid consumer fatigue going forward?
Well, it's a very real issue, and it is also an issue for the health consumer organisations, because they have limited resources and are often now bombarded by researchers looking for support for their studies. And some, in fact, have started to say, look, we're happy to help you, but you have to pay a fee. They just don't have the human resources. I firmly believe that we need collectively and even locally to promote our research. Not enough Australians really know about the good work that's being done. So even through your, in this particular area, there's ways of doing it. As I mentioned before, I've used regional, ABC regional radio, got a researcher to talk about their research. When it's got to a point of we're either wanting participants or consumer support locally, and it's effective. And when you think about it, radio is still very popular in regional Australia. It's a great way to reach people. I also think that we need a national campaign, and at NHMRC we are talking about this a lot, about how do we make sure. I talked about, the sometimes there's lack of trust in science and research. So it's very important that we go out and be proactive. And there is also some registries that are around. Again, there is no real national registry, although there is the Join Us registry, which is managed by George Institute. That is specifically for trying to get participants, and that's something worth considering. I'm registered on there, and my husband, and we're often, because our profiles, we're asked if we are interested in taking part in whether it's a survey, it's looking at consumer resources. So that's more participation, but it's a good way of doing that. Western Australia, Watton, they have a huge registry of consumers. But again, it's like social media. You've got to keep on top of it. And I don't think we use our clinicians enough. And again, that's where I've had success. Simple flyers in the waiting room. And let's face it, we know why it's called a waiting room. So there is time for people to have a look, and it's been quite successful. So it's about thinking about different ways. There is no doubt there's consumer fatigue. And so it's about building more consumers to help out.
Any final question? We'll go to the comments. Last comment. Did anyone want to make a comment about that as well?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's something that I think about as well too. So obviously I manage the involvement engagement at the Baker Institute. So I constantly am the one that is almost like essentially in between the researchers, the clinicians, and then the people that they're trying to get involved as well. So I'm able to understand who have we gone to too much, who haven't we gone to in a while, and actually manage those relationships. And I think institutes investing in that is a good way to ensure you're not going to people too many times. Like I know sometimes I've reached out to Justine, like, oh, she probably hasn't heard from me a particular opportunity in a bit, but it'll just be some check-ins or something like that here. But then, okay, here's another opportunity, because yeah, you don't want to bombard people. But I think that point around the clinicians is a big one. And I've seen that be a very big success when it comes to a lot of activities that I've had as well. Because there's a big clinical load that a lot of our clinician researchers have, and that can actually benefit the whole institute in, that lived experience in maybe a fundamental basic scientist can actually partner with someone as well. Because yeah, when we have the clinics across at Alfred Centre, that's another avenue that I've been able to leverage and use as well too for more and more people. And I think, that's something we should probably investigate a lot more. Yeah.
I think too, when it comes to the individual level of a consumer, is that it's scary for them as well. You come in your white coat, hey, do you want to chat about this? No, I don't. It's scary. They come into a hospital, it could be the worst day of their life. And then you want to chat about some research? Probably not. You've really got to make it personal for them, and make the connection with them to want to be a part of it and see the benefits, maybe for them, but for their community that they're now going to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think timing, just going on with timing, for me, similar sort of thing. Like I had a local newspaper who wanted to do an article, and I was like, whoa, this is just a couple of weeks after the cardiac arrest. And I was like, I need to get my head around this. So obviously, definitely timing's a big thing. But I also think, as Ainslie said, more awareness out in the community. Like I know I share a lot of stuff about the Baker Institute and what I get involved in with them. And people are like, oh, I didn't know they did that. So raising awareness to a lot of the consumers, there are a lot of people out there that actually don't know that researchers are looking for consumers to get involved. So knowing a point of reference for where that consumer should go to register if they are interested would be a huge benefit.
I think we've got one last question for the panel.
Margaret Hillard from the Burnett Institute. I was interested in the thought as to how to sort of make it, I guess, more regularly accepted that you should have consumer or participant reimbursement appropriate in studies for the time given, but also say for people who are the consumer reps on advisory groups or advisory committees or the like, that there is actually built into your studies. I often see people say, oh, we can't do this, but appropriate reimbursement, say that there's, NHMRC has guidelines and the like, and sort of how to increase consumer engagement, that there's researchers, you need to be putting aside the right amount of budget to be saying this. And I just wanted to sort of say, do you think it's reasonable that you should expect that we appropriately reimburse consumers, as in participants and on boards, advisory groups, for their time, and to remind the group of that if you think so, or do you think people should be giving up their time for free?
Who wants to take that one?
I think, so for example, it's part of the policy that I developed when I first got into the role. That was mainly the first thing. Did organizational, I guess, capacity, just to understand where's everyone at in terms of their understandings. Look through a bunch of resources, Monash Partners being a big help there as well too, and also, and then realizing that this is actually gold standard. It should be part of the engagement or the activities, that reimbursement. So it's separated into different activities. So depending on the activities also and the level of commitment that's required, sometimes including maybe travel, all that kind of stuff, parking, things like that, that's all included in terms of the reimbursement. There are other activities that haven't necessarily, that don't have that reimbursement angle. So I've had some things like maybe a very quick survey over an email or something like that that hasn't got that reimbursement element to it. So I guess it is dependent on what policy is being put together for the organization and what you believe is the best practice based on the guidelines that we have. But yeah, it should be, even when a researcher comes to me and is interested in setting something up, like, is this part of your budget? Do you have this? Do you have that? Because my budget's not infinite. And I don't think even many institutes have someone who is involved in consumer and community involvement and has a budget attached to their portfolio as well. So I think, yeah, it's definitely not the case. So the first question is it part of your research budget? Do you have that? Yeah.
Yes. Consumer and community involvement. This doesn't sound as though it's working. Is it? Yep, good. Yes, I agree they should be paid. Yes, as Daniel says, there are guidelines for what the remuneration should be based into categories. Monash Partners Health Research Hub has that. They are nationwide, but I think it's really important to remember where the people live and the cost of living, so that if you live in Adelaide, it's quite different to, say, if you live in Alice Springs, New South Wales versus. So this is why there tends to be state-based guidance that isn't necessarily consistent. I was quite surprised when I was looking a while ago at Western Australia, knowing that, you know, I was born and bred in WA and visited often, but the isolation, the cost of living, and I thought it was quite minuscule for the fees for the consumers. And I said that to the people. So it's also an expectation in grants assessment to see budget line items, plural, for consumer and community involvement and participation. And so there is that comes into the scoring. So yes, definitely, and there are ways to understand how that should work.
Thanks for that comment, Ainslie. It was going to be my point. If it's not, there's no budget, there's no involvement, is there? So, so it's a red flag for those people putting in grants, because it's the first thing you can look at to actually understand whether they're really doing this lip service or they're actually doing it properly. So thank you for those questions. We've run out of time. It's been an incredible discussion. Thank you so much all for your contribution. We do have some resources that we're going to show people in addition to those that Ainslie showed, that people can go to on consumer involvement and engagement. And obviously there's others in the room and experts that you can go to that can advise you as well. So again, thank you to the panel members, Justine, Melissa, Daniel and Ainslie, for being here with us from Sydney, and also to other panel members that have come from afar. I'm going to hand back over to Steve, who's going to continue with the proceedings. Thank you.
Thanks, Sophia, and thanks to the panel for a fantastic session. I must admit I'm slightly devastated at Melissa's comment that Facebook's now no longer relevant, given the fact I've just learned how to use it. But I'm sorry to say to Ainslie that we do ask her to come and give a talk, and then we just work her until she's just ready to drop, because she's also got to help us present the awards today. So thanks so much, Ainslie. And just reflecting on a comment that Daniel made about the organisation has to show the importance of something if it's going to permeate down through investigators. And I think the fact that we've now introduced a new award at the Alfred with the ARA Consortium, recognising researchers who have shown excellence in consumer involvement with their projects, is an illustration of exactly that point. So that's the first category of award that I'm going to present today, consumer involvement in research. And the committee couldn't split two of our researchers. So we have joint winners, the first winner being Sophie Wallace, the research manager from Alfred Health. And Sophie's work, a national study showcasing how large-scale consumer engagement can drive impactful change in health research and practice. And the co-winner is Jade Lane, Research and Technical Advisor from the Burnett Institute. Being received by Margaret Hillard on Jade's behalf. The second new prize that we have this year is the Alfred Research Alliance Prize for research involving Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people. And the winner this year is Divya Raghavan from Public Health Registrar from the Burnett Institute. And Divya is repeating here. Thank you, Margaret, again. Divya is also overseas.
She is actually.
She is. Thanks, Margaret, very much. The tradition of this particular forum is also to award the two prestigious research prizes, one in clinical research and one in basic research for the highest ranked publication by impact factor for journal for the year. And the clinical research, public health research prize this year is to Dr. Rongbing Zhu from the School of Public Health and Preventative Medicine. Multi-country, multi-city collaborative research network, global, regional and national mortality burden attributable to air pollution from landscape fires, a health impact assessment study published in The Lancet. I will cede the podium to Rongbin, who's going to give a presentation on his work. Thank you so much.
Hello, thank you for the award. I'm surprised for this award. I didn't realize it. So yeah, sorry. Go. Oh yeah. I'm Rongbin, a research fellow from School of Public Health and Climate Air Quality Research Unit. Okay, I'm going to give a brief introduction to our research. Yeah. So the research is about wildfires. So wildfires refers to uncontrolled, unplanned fires in wildland vegetation. So, but actually, wildfires. So here in study we use the landscape fires because it includes both wildfires and human planted fires. But in reality, so. So in reality, when we use the satellite imagery, we cannot tell it is wildfires or human planted fires. So usually we use the landscape fires as a good surrogate of the wildfires because it represents about 90% of the landscape fires are wildfires. So satellite images data has already shown that in the past 2 decades, the extreme wildfires has increased by twofold, which is closely related to the climate change. So this is really important public health issue. So the most important impact of the landscape fires is air pollution. So including the fine particulate matter, which is the small particles with about the 120 of the diameter of the human hair, and also the ozone secondary pollutant. The exposure to the PM 2.5 and ozone has been linked to increased cardiorespiratory conditions and also premature death, low birth weight. And compared to urban PM 2.5, wildfire PM 2.5 often contain more pro-inflammatory components and show greater oxidative potential and have stronger impacts on respiratory health impacts. Before our study, there's very few studies on the global mortality burden from wildfire PM 2.5. For example, this one, but it's estimated at more than 300,000 premature deaths attributable to wildfire PM 2.5 during a longer period ago. But this has many limitations such as the unreliable exposure data and unreliable epidemiological evidence, and the temporal coverage is also very limited. and there's a low estimate for fire ozone, and their lack of national trend and social economic analysis. So that's why we did this study. We quantified, we did a very comprehensive assessment of the global, regional, and national mortality burden attributable to fire-related both PM2.5 and ozone for the first 2 decades of this century. And we also evaluated the long-term trends and geographic and socio-economic disparities. The exposure data came from our previous nature study, which generated daily fire-sourced PM2.5 and ozone at a global scale, and we calculated the population weighted average exposure for each country and territory. And the population mortality came from the global burden of disease studies. So for the exposure health relationships, we used included short-term mortality impacts, which is the mortality impacts in about a few days after exposure. And the long-term mortality impacts is the mortality impacts in few years after the exposure. So the short-term mortality impacts, we used time series analysis from this multi-country, multi-city collaboration research network, which involved the daily mortality data from more than 2,000 cities across nearly 60 countries. And long-term mortality impacts is from the meta-analysis of available cohort studies. So we found like there are 1.5 million all-cause deaths attributable to fire-source air pollution, and this includes 0.45 million cardiovascular deaths and 0.522 million respiratory deaths. And we found a very notable increasing trends of the cardiovascular burden, and the majority was from fire PM2.5, but the ozone's mortality burden also very notable. Yeah. And the leading countries, including China, of the total burden, including China, India, and also the demographic Congo, Indonesia, Nigeria, Brazil, Russia, and Japan, Vietnam. And this is attributable mortality risk, so which was not affected by the population size. We can see the largest burden was found in the Central Africa and Southeast Asia. And there's also rising cardiovascular attributable mortality rates in Asia, Africa, and North America. And another important finding is we found very huge socioeconomic disparities. More than 90% of the burden was in low and middle income countries, and the attributable mortality rates in low income countries was a fourfold of those high income countries. And we also showed a very negative correlation between the attributable mortality rate and social demographic index. So in conclusion, this study found landscape fire air pollution, mainly wildfire air pollution, causes a substantial and inequitable global mortality burden, and which needs immediate mitigation and adaptation actions needed. So it has important policy and research implications in the context of climate change. So we need strengthen global wildfire emission monitoring and early warning systems, and integrate fire source air pollution into national climate health strategies, and prioritize low and middle income countries for prevention and health protection. So after this study published, we also made some recent advancement. We made a very local estimates for all the SA2 communities of Australia. We found more than 20,000 all-cause deaths were attributable to fire source air pollution during these 4 years, about 5,000 deaths per year. So which is valued such a huge amount of economic cost. So we found the high-risk communities were mainly low socioeconomic communities, and those communities with higher proportions of indigenous population. So interesting, we also made an interactive map. So by clicking this link, you can see which communities are most impacted, which provides people, the public, and policymakers an important tool to for their planning, policy, or health interventions. So yeah, here I'd like to acknowledge my supervisor and project leader, Professor Yu Ming, and also the funding sources, co-authors, collaborators, and also the traditional owners of this land we are standing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wong Min. The last prize is the Alfred Research Alliance Prize for Basic Research. The winner this year from the Baker Heart and Diabetes Institute, Dr. Keith Al-Hassani. Keith, I think, is also travelling. Too many people travelling at the moment, I think. But in place of Keith, we have the senior author of the publication, who's Professor Sam L. Oster. The publication, EZH2 inhibitors promote beta-like cell regeneration in young and adult type 1 diabetes donors in signal transduction targeted therapies. Thanks so much, Sam, to you.
Thanks. I didn't prepare any slides, so I thought what I'd do is this morning prepared some thoughts on the work, and I'd like to thank Ainslie and the panel and Stephen, and of course the Alfred Research Alliance for the award, but more so the recognition of the research. So what did we do? Well, in one line, we identified and lifted an important molecular handbrake in the pancreas. And this handbrake was critical to understanding beta cell differentiation. And what we were able to discover was that abundant pancreatic ductal cells can be influenced and nudged transcriptionally to produce a hormone that they're not designed to do, and that is to produce the hormone insulin and behave like beta cells. Now, this matters because in type 1 diabetes, the immune system targets and destroys specifically the islet and in particular the beta cell. And current management addresses the glucose levels, but it doesn't really restore, safeguard, or regenerate the beta cell. Now, we know that transplantation is successful for few. And the reason behind that is because the scarcity of donors. And there are also complications with transplantation, meaning the involvement of very powerful immunosuppressive drugs. So our idea was actually quite simple. We know that this abundant cell type, the pancreatic ductal cell, has the manual and the instructions to produce hormones, specifically insulin. We're also aware that that molecular brake is regulated by an enzyme that we call EZH2. And this molecular brake sits on that manual. And if we can loosen that brake, even for a very short period of time, and in the study, it was highlighted that as short as 48 hours, we can see this differentiation capacity. Even for a very short time, we can influence beta cell differentiation. So the way we tested this was to use one of two pharmacological inhibitors, one that's currently FDA approved and used in adult and childhood cancers. So there's potential there for future translation. In any case, we use these drugs in ex vivo models, and I'm not going to bore you with that, but the importance here is that we were able, through our collaborators at St. Vincent's Hospital here at Monash and Baker, have donor tissues. Now, these tissues are rare, and they were derived from children and adults with either new onset type 1 diabetes or long-standing type 1 diabetes. And we use these drugs to determine the differentiation capacity. And we were quite surprised that we were able to influence gene expression, but more importantly, hormone production. So what we saw in these cells was a surprise. These cells, after short-term treatment with these compounds, we identified, number one, that the ductal cell is rare. These stem cells are rare. They do express insulin, so it's real, and they're responding to glucose as well. But more importantly, the methodology is repeatable. So we've been able to do this in a number of donors, repeatedly show that we can influence these ductal stem cells to behave like, and in fact, express the hormone insulin. So that they do become insulin secreting beta cells. So, and I think because of that methodology, there is a great hope that we could use these short-term exposures and nudge transcriptionally beta cell differentiation. So the next step for us is to pair this methodology of regeneration and combine that with smarter ways to evade immune system destruction. And this could ultimately lead to fewer insulin injections for children and adults, more stable glucose levels, far fewer dangerous highs and dangerous lows, and better long-term management. So with that, I'd like to thank my team, particularly Keith, and a Monash PhD student who co-authored, first author, Sophia, as well. Thank you.
So that wraps up the session. Just a very few quick thank yous, Ursula, Kylie, and the rest of the team for putting everything together and making it run smoothly. Sophia for chairing the panel, our panelists for their contribution, and Ainslie, of course, for being our keynote speaker and working very hard for the entire time. So thanks everyone for coming, and that concludes proceedings.